Welcome to the Dreamer Podcast, episode 8. And this week I have with me Sam Freedman from the Anthony and Sam Freedman Training Partnership. Welcome, Sam.
No problem, David. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, good to have you on. We've been trying to get you on for a while and a good timing leading into Cup Week with Derby Day coming up this Saturday. So probably lots to talk about. So, I just thought we'd start off with going back in time with you. You're the youngest son of Anthony Freedman, and in the very early days, you would have probably have been involved with the, as they were once called, the FBI, all the brothers together, and Mackay Diva days. I think you were about sort of 6 to 8 years old when she was winning those Melbourne Cups. Do you have any memories of those days, mate?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I was obviously very young, but she was in her prime basically when I was starting to get a grasp on horse racing. It's probably the first day Dad's actually pushed hard for all of us kids to come to the races. Was her third Melbourne Cup. So he never, well, as you know, David, he never really goes himself anyway, but he made a point to go on that day, and he made a point to bring all of us. So we got thrown in a car park out in the public, and Mum and Dad were up in the committee room, I'd imagine. And pretty amazing scenes. I just remember watching them come around the home bend, and my brother and sister were all sort of standing just in a car park, and they were up near the fence, right on the glass. And when they came around the bend, everyone rushes to the glass. And I just got completely sandwiched out of it, hit the deck, and I was only small, so got up and managed to catch it on a television for the last sort of 200 metres, which at the time I think it was all a bit of a whirlwind. Obviously, you go running into the mounting yard, and Mum and Dad are there, and I don't think I fully had a grasp on the significance of obviously the achievement, and it's probably only been now that I'm doing it myself and training to recognise that those sort of horses, they don't grow on trees, sadly. A feat like that for the boys to be a part of it is pretty amazing.
Were you around the stables in those early days? Did you have any sort of interest in horses?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, my interest in the horses did probably stem from those specific horses. Like I was on school holidays and weekends, and Steve Adams was running the stable there at Markdale, and I was in there sort of learning off him. He'd send me off with one of the more senior sort of stable hands, and there were some great horses at the time. Horses like Alinghi and Mummify and Mackay Diva and Special Harmony, and all those sort of horses were there when I was just starting to get a grip on how it all works. So they were nice horses to learn off, but it was it was very much just working it all out and learning how to handle them and trying to become a good horseman. So that was sort of where it started. It's very hard to launch off that to work with better horses than those. So I sort of wish I was a little bit older when that was all happening, but now we're sort of trying to forge our own path, which is exciting as well.
Yeah, while you were going to school, were you doing stuff on weekends like mucking out boxes and things like that? Did they start sort of training you on how to do that type of stuff?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, mucking out and just washing horses off and scraping them and doing all those little things that you have to learn before you start to do anything with any more significance. And it was really enjoyable. That's a time when there's zero pressure, and you just you fall in love with the horse, and that's why you're in the industry. At the end of the day, that's why we're all a part of it. I loved horses. I didn't look at the industry for any other reason when I was first getting into it, other than I've been surrounded by horses my whole life and grew up on the spelling farm. So a lot of those horses would always spell out at the property that I grew up on, which, you'd walk around the farm and there'd be horses everywhere. So certainly a nice time.
Was as you were saying, you lived on actually the spelling farm, so your backyard was, you had horses in your front yard, your backyard, everywhere around you. Did you actually realise the significance of how good these horses were, some of them? Because I believe Mackay Diva used to spell in your backyard, basically, didn't she?
Yeah, she did. She would come for a spell. I think after she won that Melbourne Cup, funnily enough, the third one, she came to spell at the farm. And after a couple of weeks, Dad rang up Tony Santic and said, I'd really appreciate it if you could take this horse off my farm. I'm not getting any sleep and I'm worrying about it the whole time. So at the end of the day, whatever horse it is on the farm, the cost is the same for a horse to spell there. So whether they're a 50 rater or a champion, it's much the same. For me, no, I just remember walking around and feeding carrots to horses like Mummify and, Alinghi, and you don't quite grasp the significance of who they were. I knew that, they were good horses, so to speak, but looking back on it now, they were champions that they had at the time. You'd kill to have some of those horses in the stable now.
Yeah, so as a teenager, you were a very good cricketer. So I think you were an all-rounder, weren't you? Bowler and batter. Was that correct?
Yeah, all rounder. So I think every batsman or bowler calls themselves an all rounder anyway. But
Yeah.
yeah, I did do a little bit of both, which yeah, it was a bit of fun.
And how serious did you get with your cricket? I know you went to the UK in 2015. I think you were about 18 or 19 at that stage to play in England. What sort of level was that where you were playing at in England?
Oh no, look, it wasn't any serious level. It was basically I sort of in year 12 I was cricket captain at Melbourne Grammar, and then finished that, went in to play it with Paran Cricket Club, um, and did a season with them. And they every year they had a good affiliated club in England that they would send a player over as their sort of international player to play for the club. So it wasn't a really high level, but you arrived with a bit of pressure to perform because you're seen as their shining light in their team. So you're meant to try and either save them from relegation or try and get them promoted. So you immediately arrive with, this expectation that you're gonna turn the fortunes of their club at the time. Fortunately, the season I played there actually had probably one of the best seasons I've played personally, and I managed to strike a deal with them when I arrived. Basically, they cover your flights and accommodation for you for
Yeah.
the season, and I said to them, I'm happy to sort of cover my own accommodation, but I want to do a deal where I don't have to train.
All
So
right. Okay.
I got a full-time job working in a stable in Newmarket at the time. So I was working, around the clock. And as you know, the racing industry, there's no real rest. And then I was playing cricket every Saturday afternoon and Sunday. So I'd sort of liaise with my boss, Roger Varian, to say I need to be able to play cricket from sort of 11, 12 o'clock on a Saturday and a Sunday. And outside of that, I'm available to do whatever's
Yeah.
required. Luckily, and thankfully, both of them were really happy to work in, and it was an awesome time. I was working my ass off in the stable, and then was playing some of my best cricket. I think because I was removing any of the pressure off having to perform. I was probably exhausted most of the time, so I was just sort of getting on with it. And that was actually the last time I sort of played any real cricket. They wanted me to stay on another season because I told them I was staying in England for another year, but ultimately I was a bit done with it by then, and we actually won the league and they got promoted, and so I saw it as sort of job done, and now I can sort of rest when I'm not working. And actually crashed my car driving to a cricket game where I sort of fell asleep, and that was the line in the sand for me, that I was just doing way too much at the time. And that's where I had to really make a decision on which way you go. You either go chips in with your cricket and you try and get to a better level, or you accept where you're at, and I was going to go down that racing path. And I sort of knew I wasn't going to be good enough to get to a proper level in cricket. I was very aware of that from when I was growing up. And racing I always had a passion for. So then I was sort of chips in because, as you know, racing's all Saturdays. That's the big day.
Yeah.
And I found myself, even when I was captaining Melbourne Grammar, I had a little walkie-talkie out in the field, and I'd check my phone at drinks and lunch and try and check the results for the races. And so I think everyone in the team, everyone around me, sort of knew at some point I was gonna throw it in. And that came relatively early on. I was only sort of 19, 20 when I stopped.
So that was Roger Varian that you worked for. Was that at Newmarket?
Yeah, in Newmarket. So Roger Varian, he's one of the bigger trainers in the UK. There'd be sort of John Gosden, Charlie Appleby, William Haggis, and then you'd have Roger in the same sort of breath with regards to the size of your yard. And he had some amazing horses at the time. Horses like Postponed, who travelled around the world. And importantly for my career in the end, or what's sort of transpired since, he had a very good owner, Sheikh Mohammed Obeid, who had 40 or 50 horses with Roger at the time.
Yeah.
And so, sliding doors moments, you get opportunities to meet different people in different parts of the world. And I suppose it was, 8 years later, he was a client in the yard, which was pretty amazing.
Oh, that was fantastic. So did you set that up before you left to go to England with that stint with Roger Varian, or did you meet someone there when you were over in the UK?
Yes, well, Liam O'Rourke, so he looks after Godolphin's bloodstock in the Northern Hemisphere, more or less, and he also looks after Sheikh Mohammed Obeid's bloodstock. And I'd met him when I was working for Roger over there. I sort of came home, obviously working for Anthony and Lee, and I didn't really keep in close contact at all with Liam and Sheikh Mohammed Obeid. I had no contact with him at all. But when I went back over with Artorius and travelled him over, I think in 21 or 22, basically, I linked up with Liam, and he'd flagged that Without a Fight was a horse that was going to come out to Australia for the Crisfords in the Melbourne Cup. While I was with Roger, Sheikh Mohammed Obeid had a horse called Barsanti, which was earmarked as a Caulfield Cup candidate, and Sheikh Mohammed Obeid owned him, and he was the perfect horse for the Cups out here, but he went sore just before going into quarantine. So I was always keeping an eye on the ones that they had to see if there were any possibles that would come out. But Liam sort of teed it all up and spoke with Sheikh Mohammed Obeid, who denied whether he was going to leave the horse out here, and ultimately the decision was made not long after the race, and the rest is history.
That's good. Excellent. It was a sliding doors moment for you. And just through that experience with Roger Varian in England, what did you learn from that experience that maybe helps you today in what you do? Or did they train a different way to what your dad and Lee, your uncle, trained?
Yeah, for sure. They train. Everyone has their own little differences in how they train, and you've got to be open to different styles. The reality of me working in Australia was it was very difficult for me to go and get a job with any significance with another trainer in Australia, just because they probably always knew I was going to be coming back to Anthony and Lee. But I always wanted to get experience somewhere else. I'm not closed-minded in wanting to learn off other people. Roger definitely had a different method of training. Roger was quite hard on his horses, but he was a very good trainer of middle distance horses and staying horses. The facilities in Newmarket specifically, and in England on the whole, are incredible for getting fitness into horses without putting too much pressure on their joints. And Australia, we generally train. Pinecliff's possibly a little different, but we generally train on in a circle, and it's quite hard on horses and their legs and their soundness to try and be too hard on them. And in England, you've got lovely flowing gallops, straight lined gallops, and you can do a bit more with a horse and have confidence that they're going to handle it, pull up well. Roger was also quite in tune and starting to get a grip on the sports science aspect of training horses. He was very much modern day in his thinking, and we're seeing it obviously more and more now. It's sort of the buzzword in training is sports science, and that's definitely an aspect that I've been able to bring back and introduce to Dad and our team here, and it's a tool that we use regularly. All in all, you're always calling on different experiences. Ultimately, being able to work away there with Roger without any expectation or any sort of pressure or anything was the most pleasing part. I didn't have anyone over my shoulder sort of wondering when I was going to start to do more, and so that was a relief and good to do that before coming back and stepping up into a more senior role.
Did you feel the pressure of being the son of a freedman?
Not really, and I think that was because Dad never had any pressure on me to train at all. For him it was, if anything, he would have steered me away from training. And my mum specifically, she was much the same. I had other interests. I went to uni for a year and was studying professional communication, but ultimately I always had that passion with horses, and so I didn't feel a pressure because I made the call to get into it, and I didn't feel that I had to do it. And even still today, I don't feel any pressure of any family name or anything like that. At the end of the day, if you can train and you're training well, you will get horses. If you can't, it won't matter what your last name is. If you're not training winners and doing well, people won't have horses with you.
Yeah, well, I knew you before you went to the UK, and as a teenager.
Strap Burgundy Lass is one of my last straps before I went overseas.
And before you left, I didn't think you were going to be involved in training, but it seemed like you got that sort of that urge through that experience with Roger Varian, and then when you came back to Melbourne and back into the stable with your dad, then I think Lee might have left by then, or was just...
Yeah, he was. The timing was just then. He was going to Singapore, so pretty much at that time.
So you came back in and then worked, I think you were around 21 when you returned, and you worked for a couple of years in the stable,
Yep.
obviously probably taking on more responsibility as like a foreman. But in
Yep.
2020, you joined your dad, Anthony, in partnership. And how has that experience been since? So it's been effectively 5 years now for you. How have you felt that transition to become, a full-on trainer now?
Yeah, it is a transition, and it took a little bit of time to work out that I can't point the finger at Dad anymore. It's very much a shared experience. So yeah, it was a privilege. Dad came to me probably a little earlier on than I felt I was going to be ready for, but his thinking was that he thought I was ready for more responsibility and to help sort of lead the charge. And I'd been fortunate; I had such a good grounding from guys like Steve Adams and Ashiagi, and um, I was working underneath them, and then they were still there when I was coming up and starting to train with Dad. So it's been a great start. We're still relatively early in our training partnership, but we've had some really good horses come through, and you're always looking forward. So you're just trying to find the next ones that are going to take you to the best level.
So, do you feel that you've now changed the way the stable runs or operates through some of your skill sets?
But not too much. It's run largely the same as it's always been run. The Pinecliff operation has been it's been central to everything else. So as you know, David, like that's where the horses will all start with their training, and they might start their pre-training somewhere, but then they'll all come to Pinecliff, and then we start to either change their environment if they need to do so to go to Cranbourne, or obviously we've got the Sydney operation now where Dad is. But yeah, we haven't changed a whole lot here. The afternoons all work largely the same. You've got the use of the paddocks out in the middle. The morning routine is much the same. I suppose, like I've touched on, the sports science aspect of it, sometimes you'll start to tinker away with what work they might be doing. We've got a real grip on how to train out of Pinecliff, which I think's been, that took a bit of time to really get a handle on, and that was probably just before I went into partnership that we'd started to work that out, and so that's been really important in the success of us as well.
Yeah, and you've taken on. You told me you went to uni and studied some communications. You probably didn't finish that degree, did you?
No, I did 1 year,
Yeah.
and that was
Well,
it.
that's helped you in because you are now pretty much the communications representative for the stable now,
Yeah, I
which I
don't have much competition in that
uh,
regard with Anthony.
I don't think Anthony will fight you for that one. But you have actually probably opened up the stable from that point of view with the media because you are doing a lot of media now. It's pretty much regular. Every
Yep,
probably once, twice a week now, you're on radio
yep.
and probably doing a bit on racing.com as well. And how have you felt you're handling the communication side of things?
Yeah, look, it's very important. I think, from an owner's perspective, it's very expensive to have a horse in training. So, your communication with people and um, showing them the horse videos and all that sort of stuff is so important in holding people in. There's so many options for people who own horses. They can go to any stable they want to. They can have horses wherever they like. Ultimately, I've tried to introduce more communication into the stable, and but maintaining Anthony's sense of honesty and the way that he's always communicated to clients, which is, to be frank about a horse's ability and where they sit and what level they can get to. And, there's no real sugarcoating, as you know, David, like where we think a horse might be. And it's been important just to be able to communicate that in a way that owners can understand and respect. And the more information you can give, that the easier it is for an owner to make decisions on horses. And so that's been good. I mean, the media side of it that's really stepped up, I'd say, probably in the last 5 to 6 years. There's more and more channels of radio and TV and all of that are looking to advertise the sport. And from my perspective, it's an industry that's not big enough that you respect when you get the opportunity to speak about both my stable but also the industry on the whole in a positive light. And this time of year is obviously a really important part of that. You admire people like Gay Waterhouse and Chris Waller, who are amazing advocates for the industry and the sport, and they speak so well about it, and they help educate the general public. And I think that the sport is moving into that space where it's starting to resonate, hopefully, with that general public and not feel like a closed shop. I suspect in the 90s and 2000s it was very much, industry participants weren't so open with everyone to talk about everything. It's a very clean and well-run game now, and it seems like it's it's very transparent, and I think that that's really important.
Yeah, even Anthony's doing video updates in Sydney now, so you've had some sort of effect on him. Have you got yourself involved with the Trainers Association as well of late? Did I hear that?
Yeah, yep. I'm on the ATA, which has been great. It was something again that I was asked to sort of consider going on there, and I was more than happy to have a crack. More than anything, it's actually nice to feel like you can make some change in the industry moving forward. And JD Hayes, he's on there as well, and Calvin McAvoy, he's sort of in a role there as well. And at the end of the day, we're sort of coming up through, and we're still very young, but we may well be in this industry for a very long time. So it's important, I suppose, decisions that are getting made are going to reflect the future of the industry. And I'm finding it challenging. There's so many different aspects of it, and you're getting feedback from different trainers on on changes they'd like to see, and it's important you're listening to everyone from your smallest trainers to the biggest trainers, and everyone needs to have a voice in that. So I think Troy Corsons is now the president, and Robbie Griffiths did an amazing job, and I think in Robbie's tenure and now into Troy's, there's a real sense of go get it attitude. They're not sitting on their hands and accepting everything. We're really wanting to make positive change and reflect the Trainers Association and all trainers that to best reflect their thoughts on everything.
Yeah, obviously Troy brought in the youth of Calvin, yourself, and JD, which obviously there's new ways of doing things now. Data is a huge part of training now. That's all we hear now. I assume you're using data a lot in your sort of training methods as well now.
Yeah, we are. We certainly are with trackers and heart rate monitors and stride and stuff on the horses, and then also from a form perspective, we've got someone who does our form, and then I've also got a program that I'll refer to to sort of back up a view. You still need your eye, and you're looking at the horse, and that's one thing Dad's always drilled into me. You can't train horses from behind a screen. If it was that simple, you'd have scientists and mathematicians training horses and doing very well at it. So it's a changing age. And then the other part of the ATA that's really important is the respect for the punter, which you're seeing more and more twilight and night meetings, and that's to try and maximise turnover. And if that's ultimately what the punters are after, we are in the business of putting on a show, and it's a sport. So, we all need to be respectful of that. And so finding that balance of participants not being worn out by night meetings and that sort of thing, but also making sure that, the turnover and punters are happy with the product and happy to bet on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a different age now to when I grew up, when I was following the races, and the way people punt and the information that you get now. But your dad, I rate your dad as one of the most astute trainers and horsemen in Australia. Has he adapted to data, or is he still using his eye as the older trainers tend to do?
He still uses his eye, and this new little chapter that we're moving into with Dad looking after the Randwick stable, which is 24 boxes, and we've got a lot of the 2-year-olds up there. So he's got, I think, 18 2-year-olds in the stable, and there's only 5 or 6 older horses. It's interesting you sort of ask, because the other day he'd galloped sort of 6 2-year-olds, and he'd given me his thoughts on where he thought they were at. They all had the trackers on, and we've got a data analyst who he looks at all of the data, and he'll type up his assessment on what he thinks of where they're at and what they're doing. And Dad's, his opinion on the horses pretty much reflected the data. So it was, I sort of mentioned that to him and said, look, the data on those 2-year-olds was pretty much exactly as you thought, which was pleasing for him, because it was sort of like, well, something's working, because we're sort of marrying up on how it works. So he's certainly open-minded to it, more so than what he probably was initially. And I think the more body of evidence you get to support that there's value in using data, the more he's open to looking into it. But it won't take away from the fact that, he can look at a horse and say, that needs a paddock or that doesn't. And data won't tell you that sort of stuff. Your eye will tell you that.
Yeah, so I think in 2023, well, it was 2023, the winter, you got, actually, you got what without a fight, I think in 2022, came for the Melbourne Cup, didn't it? Then it stayed here. And then it campaigned in Brisbane for the winter with your dad, who was up there on the Sunshine Coast for that winter.
Yep.
And it won a few races up there. It looked pretty a promising type. And then it came down here, and in 2023, you won the Caulfield or Melbourne Cups. That must have been a fantastic thrill for someone who'd been in, training for 3 years to get a Caulfield or Melbourne Cup double. Not many people get that opportunity, and you did. How thrilling was that for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing. It was 12 months before, if you'd said this is the position you'll be in, I would have just laughed. We didn't have a proper stayer in the stable. We had, I think, maybe a Realm of Flowers who ran really well in the Melbourne Cup the year before. She ran 5th or 6th. Warning had run well. Steel Prince, they'd all been running top 10. But the reality is we knew we didn't have the horse to match it with all the imports that come in. So when he was in the stable, and to be honest, even when he was working through the autumn into the winter, I still wouldn't have foreseen that could have transpired. It was only really when he won that Q22 in Queensland, he pulled really hard for Mark Zahra and still let rip and was, ultra impressive. That's when we sort of thought, well, we've got a Caulfield Cup horse in our hands. And Sheikh Mohammed Obeid, actually, he was not sure the horse ran a strong 2 miles. So he'd finished, I think, 13th or something in the Melbourne Cup the year before, but he was ridden up on the speed. And so that was really the change we'd made, was to just bring him back and ride him back in the field. And he was settling and showing a really good turn of foot. And the Caulfield Cup was amazing. He didn't have the greatest lead up to that. He was a bit crook, actually, sort of 10 days prior. The improvement he made from that Caulfield Cup to the Melbourne Cup was obvious for everyone to see at home and in his work. So we were actually probably more confident going to the Melbourne Cup than the Caulfield Cup. And yeah, like I said, not something you'd ever expect to achieve in your training lifetime, let alone so early on in my career. But, a race that I've obviously watched on from when I was young, and it was a dream to win it one day. So, yeah, amazing to be a part of.
So that whole preparation, was that without a fight trained out of Pinecliff or Flemington? Because you only had Pinecliff and Flemington at the time.
Yeah, he actually he raced once out of Flemington, I think, in the in his first up run in the Underwood. And then he picked up a little bug about a week later. So we actually moved him back to the farm, and he was able to get a paddock for a few hours each day. And so Pinecliff was his main training tool, because he went straight from the Underwood to the Caulfield Cup. He actually didn't Turnbull, which would have been a normal lead up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Pinecliff, we're lucky. The grass is in amazing condition. It's really open space. He did a lot of interval gallops, which is something our stayers would do here. And yeah, amazing to be able to use this facility.
Yeah, and talking about facilities, you now have Pinecliff in operation. You moved into some stables at Cranbourne, and you've taken over Randwick as well, where Anthony is now based. A lot of trainers were sort of had that city base. You moved out of Flemington, which not many people do. So was that a logistical decision, or talk us through why you made that change?
Yeah, there was a few reasons. Cranbourne, this Southside racing is really on the rise. They're getting a lot of government support. They're putting a lot of funds into the training facilities. So you've got access to so many different tracks. They've got the sand dunes, which is, a great tool to use for some older horses and to keep horses sound. You've got nearly unlimited grass, particularly when the weather's good. So 3 or 4 grass tracks that are, able to be used. The trials have always been awesome there. You get a real guide on where your horses are at. Flemington was amazing for horses. I've got no bitterness towards the training centre there. It was a decision to try and capitalise on the access to grass and jump outs at Cranbourne, and it's also much closer to Pinecliff. So logistically, to move between the two, and particularly with Anthony looking to head to Sydney, for myself, it was a lot easier now. I can get across to Cranbourne and Pinecliff very easily across 2 stables, and Flemington to Pinecliff was just becoming a little bit difficult to logistically do. So that was another reason for it. But we've largely kept the same amount of horses in training that we had across Pinecliff and Flemington, and we'll always keep that number about the same.
So What sort of size are you at Cranbourne? How many boxes are you there now?
There's 40 boxes at Cranbourne, and we keep about 48 at Pinecliff, so
Yeah.
about 88.
The trials at Cranbourne, I do think, is a better guide to them because you've got Kieran, you've got Mick Price there, the Bussetons, all the big stables are there. So those trials on Mondays give you a really good guide. Whereas the ones at Flemington will sometimes a bit harder to sort of get a gauge on your horses. Is that correct?
Yeah, they are. The Flemington jump outs, yeah, they're largely always 800 metres. That they're on the inside grass, which is, can be very beneficial to lead or be up on the speed. And if you're a 800-metre horse and you don't run further than that, you won't trial well
Yeah.
at Cranbourne. It's a real test. You know where you sit once you've had a good hit out there, which is what we've always wanted. We don't, as I said to you, we don't sugarcoat where they're at. You want to just see and get a guide of where they're going to sit, and then you can place them as best you can from there.
So where do you base yourself? Where's the office now, and where are you basing yourself mostly?
So I'm Pinecliff at the moment. This is the office here. I've just moved in. I bought it in Mornington a couple of years ago, and I've just moved into that place. So I'm 30 minutes to the Cranbourne stable, and then it's 30 minutes to the Pinecliff stable. I live 2 minutes from Pinecliff. So I would do Pinecliff every day, and Cranbourne I would do probably 2 or 3 mornings a week. Go in early because we start riding at Cranbourne at 5, and at Pinecliff we don't start riding till 6. So quite often I can get a few important lots in at Cranbourne early and put some important lots at Pinecliff a bit later in the morning, so I can be able to get across to the two bases.
And Anthony's based at Randwick, and I assume he's enjoying the lifestyle there. And I think isn't he close to a pub there, where he lives? He's got a
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he's not far from the Centennial, so
Centennial,
he's he
that's his
spent a bit of
local.
time in there. Yeah, it certainly is.
And how much do you use speaking to each other now that you're based in different states?
Look, we speak every day in one aspect or another, whether it be a WhatsApp message or on the phone. Communication's really important, especially when you're trying to be across a couple of different stables. We have some horses that will shift between states, so it's important we're on the same page with them. But, he takes a real interest in how things are running down here, just as I would in how things are running up there. So it's very much a team thing. He was down a couple of days ago. He had a look at the horses. He came in and watched some work on Tuesday. I'll go up there once every few weeks, have a look at the horses on an afternoon. That's very important, and we've always wanted to maintain that sort of hands-on aspect, that it's not a factory. We're not just trying to have a heap of horses in training, that they're trained by Anthony and I, and we've got our finger on the pulse.
And decisions for sort of race planning and things like that. Is he getting involved in the Melbourne horses and their preparations, or are you pretty autonomous with regards to that?
Yeah, look, I'm probably having more of the input just on the Melbourne horses, on where they're running, but we've got a spreadsheet that we've got a number of different people have access to, Dad being one of them, and he's able to see some plans on where we intend to run horses. I'll still call him and canvass his opinion on some horses. He obviously watches every runner and every trial, so he knows where they're at, and I'll give my thoughts and ask for his opinion on something. So yeah, it's very much a team thing.
And you said all the 2-year-olds are in Randwick, and again, your dad has been a very astute trainer when it comes to 2-year-olds and the preparation of 2-year-olds. Even though you don't push your 2-year-olds very hard early on, I know you do. That's a technique you've used over the years. You've actually had a lot of success with 2-year-olds. So is that something that sort of Anthony's just sort of gained a knowledge of, and when they're ready to start running?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Dad's always had a real art with the young horses. And as you said, we won't have many runners pre-Christmas or even up to New Year. We might have one or two that step out, but not many. And then after New Year, we'll always have some ready to go for that, say, Blue Diamond series and through towards the Slipper. He's been doing it so long, he knows the timing of those horses, but he also knows how important it is that, that you're the one looking at them. 2-year-olds don't fit into a system, so to speak. You need to keep your eye on them mentally. You're training them mentally more than physically half the time. They run on a lot of nervous energy. And so it's keeping them settled and working out which ones have got that natural speed and the ability to handle the preparation mentally as well. And that just comes from Dad's experience over the years with so many horses, and he was in charge of a lot of the young horses when they were training out of Markdale. So that's critical. And in this climate and the way Australian racing is centred, 2-year-olds are such a big part of it, and you've really got to be focused on it.
And there is a common belief that 2-year-olds are better trained out of city stables because there's a bit more happening. They get a bit more exposure to the noises and things like that. Is that why pretty much you're using Randwick for the 2-year-olds?
Yeah, it's a good point. And actually, we spoke about it today, Dad and I, because Flemington was really good for that aspect. There's a lot going on. So when you put a 2-year-old in that environment, it's sort of sink or swim. They'll either cope with it mentally or they won't. And some of them will learn to, which is important. But it's taxing on the horse. Physically it might be any harder than training out of a quiet facility like Pinecliff, but mentally they're doing a lot more. They're active, and the Randwick stable can desensitize those 2-year-olds from what they're going to encounter on a big race day. So they're in a 2-year-old race at Flemington on Melbourne Cup Day, and there's a huge crowd, and you've got to encounter a lot of different aspects as a young horse. And if they've had that experience at home in some respect, it's really important. If we cuddle them the whole time at Pinecliff, you can find that you take them to the trials or to the races and they boil over a bit because they're just not used to that. And that can be the difference between winning a Group 1 and not. At the end of the day, if they go to the races, boil over, and they go to the paddock, or if they go to the races and they handle it really well, and then they can go to the next one and keep stepping up. It's definitely an important part of it, and a reason the Randwick stable has been so critical in the way we're moving going forward.
All right. So just how many Group 1 winners have you trained now in partnership with your dad,
I think it's maybe 6 or 7,
and you've
yeah.
got a lot of you've always trained for Godolphin, and with that split up, I assume you got a few more out of that split up, and you've got Tentyrus running in the Group 1 Coolmore this week, and that must be pretty exciting. I mean, I think was pretty much favourite for the Golden Slipper last year until he got injured, did he, before the Golden Slipper?
Yeah, he did. He was really a dominant winner in the Todman a fortnight before the Slipper, and he was Slipper favourite when we had to withdraw him. He pulled up lame on the Sunday with a tibial stress fracture, and he went to the paddock, and we just left him alone, and he went through his rehab. And his prep's been geared around getting to this race Saturday, and touch wood, everything's going to plan so far. He was an excellent winner at Caulfield last time out. It's a very strong addition this year. I think there's 3 or 4 really talented colts that are lining up, which is great for the industry. Yeah. It's really important, this race, for the breeding industry, and it's nice to be a part of it.
And I mean, it's always a tough race to win. Obviously, the best colts and sometimes fillies are racing in it. Do you feel any more pressure because it is a Group 1? It's basically a stallion making race. Is there any more extra pressure you're feeling?
You do to a degree, but you're just treating every horse the same, and you're dotting every I and crossing every T with the horse. And once you leg Mark on board, it's over to him. So you're just working to get the horse there in as good a shape as you can on the day. And then there's so many factors, as that need to fall into line during a race and on race day that are out of your control. So I just try and keep a clear mindset on control the controllables and let the rest work itself out.
Are we going to see your dad in Melbourne this week for any of the races?
I think you will. Yeah, I think he's going to fly in Saturday morning, and I'm not sure you'll see him Melbourne Cup Day. That's his most challenging day.
Yeah. Is there any other horses to look forward to during the week for you?
I think Point Barrow on Oaks Day, she'll be a great chance in the Roses, 3-year-old fillies listed race, and I don't mind Street Artist on Melbourne Cup Day in the 3-year-old 1,000. So they're probably 2 other chances.
That's great. All right, we'll just finish up by going through our horses that we've got with you. We'll start with the 2-year-old, the Hellbent Lonspresso colt. Now, I don't know how much you know of him. He is obviously with Anthony in Sydney. I believe he potentially might go to the trials at Randwick next Friday. We're getting the name through as soon as possible this week. But have you heard much from Anthony about this horse?
Look, I think Dad's been really pleased with him. He's had a really good preparation. I think he's doing some work tomorrow morning that'll sort of decide whether he does push onto those trials. As you know, in Sydney, those trials are like races. So
they are. Yeah.
You've got to be really ready for them. But he's very much in the mold of a horse that'll get up and run early enough. But he looks like he's got some strength to really train on at 3, which is what the breed do. Generally, they're not jump and run 2-year-olds. They're getting better as they get older. But lovely style of horse. He's got a good body to him, and I think the old man's been pretty pleased with him.
We've got Interrogate, who's just finished up a prep at Cranbourne. This is the Toronado Shine On Anna, the half to See You in Heaven. He ran second in a trial just before you tipped him out. The trial was actually second fastest of the morning. It was actually the fastest was Golden Boom, and they ran the second fastest. And the horse that beat him in that trial came out and won by about 4 or 5 on the week afterwards. How did he finish off the prep? And what's your opinion of him?
Look, he had a really good preparation. He's been a little brittle to train with his shins. He's gone shin sore 2 or 3 times now, but he's got a real engine there. I really like the horse. I've been disappointed not to be able to sort of get him to the races and show what he's got, because he does impress at home. We probably could have gone to the races, I felt, like last preparation, and if he was a horse that I didn't have a really good opinion of, I reckon I would have raced him, and he would have run really well. He may well have got away with it and won. He was just starting to feel those shins again, and my experience with that is, I don't want the horse to sour off to the idea of racing and training, so we put him in the paddock, and I think we're going to have a proper product to work with next preparation. And all the feedback from riders and all the data we've looked at, he looks a horse that's showing good promise. His trials have backed that up, and I think we'll have a fully mature 3-year-old to work with through the summer and autumn. The Toronados generally aren't 2-year-olds. It's not uncommon to see them take a little bit of time to mature physically, but I think he'll make the grade.
Yeah, he was a late foal and probably a backward type when we bought him, and we knew he would probably only race as a 3-year-old. But he's progressed to my eye. He's progressed really well, and exciting to see him in the autumn. And finally, we've got our other 3-year-old, which is VIP, the Russian Camelot gelding as well. Yeah, he's another horse that we never really expected to race as a 2-year-old. Out of a Savabeel mare, so we would expect that he'd be pretty much a miler, middle distance type in time. And what has he shown you to date as well?
He sort of backed that up. He showed a little bit of speed that we're able to push on to a jump out, but I do think, he's going to be a middle distance 3-year-old type. He was still a little bit refined. He wasn't fully mature. He hadn't strengthened up completely in his last preparation. So, he'll be getting going over that summer, autumn period. And again, centering him around getting out to a mile and beyond. It wouldn't shock if he ended up out to a mile and a quarter, even a mile and a half, particularly on his breeding, might get to. So he's never going to be a horse you're going to see a lot in a half-mile jump out or anything like that. He was always going to be one that we'd start to see more of once he gets out to 7 and a mile.
Interesting. I went to Widden, the Stallion Parade, and saw Russian Camelot himself, and he's still just a leggy sort of a type. He's not really filled out. I think that's what his progeny, he's thrown to his progeny.
It's funny though as well. We had his full brother Russian Camelot in the stable. He was just this leggy, wiry horse. He never had a lot of substance. He didn't have a lot of girth. Yeah, much the same.
Yeah, that's right. All right, Sam, thank you very much for your time. It's been great sort of getting to know you and where you've come from and where you've got to. And I know there's a lot more ahead for you and Anthony, and we've been associated with Anthony since we started this business 15 years ago, and our most success has actually been with your stable, and we hopefully have a lot more success in the future.
For sure.
So thanks for your time today, Sam.
No, of course, anytime. Thanks, Dave.